p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, welcome to Brazier. Fast-paced news from 4 until 6 today. Coming up in the next hour, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in Sweden earlier as he signed declarations to solidify European security. Is now travelling to Finland to sign a similar agreement. We'll bring you his press conference live at around 5:20 this afternoon, if it all goes to plan. In the meantime, we'll look at the new security deal, the implications, and with Sweden and Finland considering whether to join NATO, we'll weigh up the possible response from him, Vladimir Putin. Also, is the Rwanda scheme set to get underway within days? The first Channel migrants have been told by Priti Patel that they're being sent to Rwanda. It's been reported some asylum seekers have gone to ground for fear of being sent there. I'll speak to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who's got some truly astonishing statistics for you. And the debate this hour, after standing in for Her Majesty to deliver the Queen's speech yesterday, I'm asking, is the future of monarchy safe in Prince Charles's hands? And joining me in the studio for the next 2 hours, Sarah Elliott, spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK. But first, we have the latest news headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 4. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has signed a historic security agreement with Sweden as the Nordic country considers joining NATO. He's due to sign a similar declaration with Finland later today. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted a re-evaluation of security in the Nordic countries. Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to respond, though, if the two countries join the military alliance. Boris Johnson says the UK will support Sweden if it decides to apply for NATO membership.
The war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. But sovereign nations must be free to make those decisions without fear or influence or threat of retaliation. So I'm very pleased today with you, Prime Minister Anderson, to sign this mutual security assurances declaration.
Well, in Ukraine, new drone footage shows a Russian tank being destroyed in the Kharkiv region as the country pushes a counter-offensive in the north. Ukraine's Ministry of Defence claims the attack was carried out on Russia's most advanced tank. UK military intelligence says Ukraine has successfully struck Russian air defences and resupplied vessels with drones. Defence Minister Leo Doherty told MPs the UK must be prepared for the war to last a very long time.
We have all been clear that our support to Ukraine is something that will, I expect, to last many years. We can't speculate on how long it might last, but I think we must be prepared for it to last for a very, very long time.
An economic think tank warns Britain is on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. Helen Barnard from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation told GB News the government's existing support package of £22 billion doesn't go far enough.
I think it's extraordinary that they are saying it's fine, everything's OK, we'll wait till the autumn. Because for people at the very sharpest end of this, they are missing, essentials now. They're getting into debt now. Their health is getting hammered now. Their mental health is getting eroded by that constant anxiety of how on earth am I going to feed the family and keep things going.
Meanwhile, millions of renters living in unsafe conditions should have their homes improved under major housing reforms. The Levelling Up Secretary announced the new Renters Reform Bill will be extended to nearly 4.5 million households. The plans will help tenants living in damp, unsafe and cold homes and protect them from eviction notices without reason. Michael Gove also announced an overhaul of planning permission regulations, which could see neighbours voting on home developments, including extensions in their street. The Foreign Secretary says the UK will not shy away from taking action over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Liz Truss says proposals put forward by the EU would take the country backwards and cause more checks, paperwork and disruption. The DUP is refusing to form a devolved government in Northern Ireland until issues with the protocol are resolved. Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill says it's unacceptable for the DUP to block the nomination of a new speaker.
It's not good enough for the people here that the DUP are holding society to ransom, punishing society, preventing the establishment of a speaker and an executive to actually respond to the things that the people are worried about right now, the cost of living crisis and the health service. So I don't think it's acceptable, the position that Jeffrey Donaldson has articulated today. But I'll make this call to him again today. Join with the rest of the parties who will be there on Friday.
2 former police officers jailed for taking pictures of murdered sisters Beba Henry and Nicole Smallman at a London crime scene have been attacked in prison. During an appeal against their sentences, judges were told 48-year-old Deniz Jaffer has been attacked 3 times, whilst 33-year-old Jamie Lewis has been assaulted twice. Both were jailed for 2 years and 9 months in December after pleading guilty to misconduct in a public office. Jaffer and Lewis lost their appeals. Face masks will no longer be mandatory in airports and on flights in Europe from Monday next week. That's the new recommendation from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and the EU's Aviation Safety Agency. But airlines have been told to encourage passengers to wear face masks on flights to or from countries where it's still required on public transport. Well, you're up to date. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Brazier.
Seven minutes past 4. Boris Johnson has been visiting Sweden a little earlier today and will be speaking live from Finland in a little over an hour to sign new security declarations with those 2 nations. As and when that press conference happens live, we'll bring it to you, of course. There's been some debate about whether the countries which have historically been militarily neutral will join NATO to bolster European security after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Speaking alongside the Swedish Prime Minister, Boris Johnson confirmed that the 2 countries would come to each other's aid in a time of crisis.
Whether it's in the event of a disaster or a military attack, what we're saying today is that upon request from the other party, we would come to the other party's assistance. And it's vital to state that, I think, now ever more important to state that now in the grim circumstances in which we find ourselves with the Russian attack on Ukraine.
Let's turn to the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman. Chip Chapman, welcome to you. We would be under a mutual obligation, would we, to help Sweden and Finland?
Not necessarily. It's strategic ambiguity. It can mean what you want in terms of military assistance. We're providing military assistance to Ukraine at the moment. And I think you have to look at the geopolitical and geostrategic position of both of them to see what that actually means. So because we first signed an agreement with Sweden, it's worth saying that geostrategically, Sweden doesn't have a common border with Russia, so there's no threat of a land invasion. The Baltic Sea is the area of interest, particularly Gotland, which dominates the Baltic Sea, and that is a maritime flank which Russia does share. And Russia has violated the airspace of Gotland a number of times, but no action's been taken. And of course, you have sovereignty over your airspace there because of the Chicago Convention. It's different with Finland, that does share a land border, but they are protected by their lakes, and only a mass attack, as happened in the 1939-40 Winter War, would have a problem for Finland, and we won't see that at the moment. Lastly on this point is that it's ridiculous to have a second flank when you're struggling on the first flank, having a campaign in the Donbass at the moment from a Russian perspective.
Yeah. From that Russian perspective, how do you think, Chip, they'll view this? With suspicion or something stronger?
Well, we've already had an inkling of this from Medvedev on the 11th of April when he said that they would reinforce the Baltic, including with nuclear weapons. So there will be diplomatic harumphing from the Russians, but I suspect that will be the limit of it. Prior to that 11th of April announcement by Medvedev, it was, you will see severe consequences, but that has been a phrase which the Russians have used a number of times, including, for example, when the Turks shot down the Su-24 in Turkish airspace from Syria in November 15, and the severe consequences were more to do with stopping tourist traffic. So I wouldn't say that we're ratcheting up and escalating towards any war on another flank.
Chip Chapman there, we're going to leave it today. Thanks very much indeed for your time, appreciate it. Sarah Elliott, US-UK commentator, alongside me today to reflect on this one and the words of Boris Johnson in Finland in a wee while. We'll bring it live to our viewers. We think at about 5:20. These things often slip. There'll be questions as well, not just about European security, presumably. This is the big shake-up, isn't it? This is the big shake-up of the map brought about by what Russia's done in Ukraine.
Right. And it's a sign that, we're escalating on our side as much as Russia is escalating on theirs. And of course, this raises the stakes, and it does, put our men and women kind of on the front line should anything happen to Sweden. I think it's a big step. It's a step closer to them being part of NATO. I think it might be good for Parliament to debate such a move because it does put our funds and resources and our blood and treasure out there for them. But of course, we're in a new world now, and Russia has changed the game, and it's no longer the post-war period. And it's good to see Boris out there as a leader in Europe as well. And you don't hear any other European countries, looking to go to the aid of each other.
I often wonder about that. I mean, it feels like Boris is ploughing a particular furrow for Britain. I mean, if those Russian state TV broadcasts are to be believed, there seems to be a particular and special animus directed by Russia at Boris Johnson as Britain's leader right now. But I can't say with total confidence that some other European leaders aren't playing, maybe not quite as leading role as he is, but something akin to it. We're quite parochial, aren't we, sometimes? We just see what we see from Britain.
Right, but no one else is making any headlines. We're also one of, 8 NATO countries that has 2% of our GDP on defense spending. We've really ratcheted up our defense spending. I think we have $238 billion over 10 years and $24 billion in just this cycle alone.
Yeah, big figures, and we'll be spending more. That looks very, very probable, doesn't it? That's for sure. We're going to move on. It's been reported that the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is going to announce the UK will make changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol without the consent of the EU. The deal, let's just remind you, it defines Northern Ireland's post-Brexit trade agreement. It's been called into question after elections for the Assembly last week. You'll remember Sinn Féin, we occasionally need to point out it's formerly the political wing of the IRA, became the largest party, and the DUP said they wouldn't enter into a power-sharing agreement unless changes were made to that protocol. Alternatively, say the Unionists, it should be scrapped entirely. So now we have threats of a trade war with the EU if the UK government makes changes without the bloc's consent. Let's turn to Mick Fealty, who's the editor of Slugger O'Toole. Mick Fealty, welcome to you. For those people who do not follow every minute change in Northern Ireland politics, where does this now take us?
Well, I think we're... so we've had the election. The DUP, who were formerly sort of partners of the Conservative Party the whole way through Brexit until the very end, until this protocol landed in their lap and they had to sell it to their own voters in Northern Ireland, were absolute supporters of it. Suddenly they figured there's a major problem. The major problem is that trade from west to east, from Northern Ireland into Britain, works okay. It's the stuff that comes the other way that's a big issue. And to give you some practical idea of what that is, so most of the big retailers have been complaining about it. There's only really two, Aldi and Lidl, who have an all-island supply chain rather as opposed to an all-islands supply chain, and that's created great problems for them. It's also going to create huge issues for smaller retailers within Northern Ireland and the agricultural industry, particularly around sheep and cattle. Normally, what has happened in the past is that calves and younger animals are imported from Scotland into Northern Ireland, and previous to Brexit, further into the Republic. That now has become as deeply problematic, potentially, as trade across the Dover Straits. What has prevented it from getting to an economic crisis has been the grace periods, whereby a lot of these restrictions have been sort of palmed off into the future.
The grace periods just, can't be relied upon to be there in perpetuity, can they?
No, and that's why there has been this ongoing negotiation through various committees. And I think really, we've been Slugger O'Toole's been around for, will be 20 years this January, and we have a reputation of producing good, sound analysis. We don't do that simply by reacting to what a government minister might say or a party political leader might say. But the way I would interpret Ms. Truss's remarks here is it's a kind of an opening frame for a negotiation that has been postponed strangely since last October. But I think now the Assembly elections are over and the DUP are making this a political priority. I think this is really an opening salvo in that negotiation.
Yeah, and probably delayed, not least, by COVID and lockdown and those 2 years of not been able to plough ahead with the domestic political agenda and sort things out with Brussels. Mick Fealty, we've got to leave it there, but appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. And now the Home Secretary has confirmed the first migrants facing being sent to Rwanda have been handed official confirmation they'll be sent there. Priti Patel hasn't given any suggestion yet of how many people were in the first group, but it's believed they could be on their way within days. Today, MP Tom Pursglove, the Minister for Justice and Tackling Illegal Migration, faced questions from a parliamentary committee on the scheme. There's also reports from an immigration charity that some asylum seekers have gone into hiding over fear of being sent to Rwanda. Let's turn to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's here in the studio with me. Hi to you, Mark. How many do we think have gone into hiding for fear of being sent to Rwanda?
Well, certainly according to charities, human rights groups that have been speaking to and dealing with and working with some of those asylum seekers who are currently in the system, they are saying that a handful have decided that they want to disappear off into effectively what is the black economy. So they will live and work here illegally. And they expect that there could be many more. Of course, we know that actually the numbers of people living here illegally in this country anyway is a very significant problem. I reported on this a few years back.
Numbers are huge, Mark.
And yeah, there was about 1 million then, at least, estimated to be living and working in the black economy in the UK. So the fear is that potentially more people could disappear into that.
And what does that say about somebody that they have so little confidence in the asylum process and their ability to navigate it successfully, that they do not want to submit themselves to it. They'd rather take their chances and disappear. How can we trust somebody who does that?
Well, there's all kinds of issues in terms of trust of those that are coming over, but they would say, of course, with regard to the system as well, that they can't actually trust the system, that they feel that it's stacked against them. We know that those that are coming across by irregular routes, in other words, they're paying criminal gangs to send them across the channel, are actually getting schooled in things like throw your passports away, throw your mobile phones, Nigel Farage, just the other
Say
week.
you're younger than you actually are, all the rest of it. Mark, I know you've got some breaking news, which I know you're going to bring us in just a second, but just before we do that, I want to reflect on this with Sarah Elliott. Rwanda, is it having a deterrent effect? Is it a political smokescreen for a government that's struggling to show it's doing something tangible about this? What do you make of it?
I mean, I think it is doing something. It is acting as a deterrent. We're having less crossings. Clearly, people don't want to go to Rwanda, so maybe they'll be less likely to come across. But of course, the smugglers are telling them, oh, that's not true. It's just government talk. Oh, yes, and you're going to meet the Queen. So pay me £5,500 and we'll still, ship you and your children over there. It's going to be an ongoing crisis. I think it's yet to be tested, but it's a creative solution and it's something different. And I do applaud the government for trying something.
And one that actually has been tried by Denmark and a centre-left government in charge there, but people often forget that. Mark, that breaking news.
Yeah, a concerning story of a 15-year-old girl who is missing from the Bristol area for 15 days now. Even in Somerset, police initially treated this as a disappearance. They are now treating it, they say, as child abduction. We have the photograph of this young woman, Maddie Thomas, on screen now. Now, for those listening on GB News Radio, they can go to our website or our social media feeds and you can see that photograph of this 15-year-old girl. Now, police say she is particularly vulnerable. She was in foster care when she disappeared some 15 days ago now. They believe she may be in the company of a man, and that's why they are now terming this as child abduction. And they just don't know at all where she could be. They say that she could be anywhere in the country, so they've now issued a nationwide alert for anyone that might have information on this 15-year-old. They say if you see her or have any information, then immediately call 999. They are very concerned, they say, for her safety. OK, Mark, thanks very much indeed. Coming up after the break, more on the Queen's speech. I know it was yesterday's story, but there's a lot that strikes you when you look more deeply into it, actually. One element, for instance, a plan which would allow neighbours to vote on whether certain housing developments can go forward without having to gain full planning permission, sort of micro-referendums on your conservatory. We'll discuss that next with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. We'll be back in a tick.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, the dust has settled on the Queen's speech. We brought you the sort of headlines of it yesterday, but as you drill down into it, you see some more interesting stories. We're going to try and focus on one. In yesterday's Queen's speech, plans were set out to allow neighbours to veto housing and developments in their local area. It's all part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. It will allow residents to vote on a street-by-street basis on their neighbours being allowed to make home improvements. The usual stuff, conservatories, extensions. It's hoped that this will lead to projects being built more quickly, as there won't be need to apply for full planning permission, if that is your builder can get hold of the timber, the breeze blocks, the bricks, Liam Halligan, which isn't necessarily that easy right now, is it?
It isn't, and they're all very, very expensive with those ongoing supply chain issues. Look, there's been a big U-turn by the Tories on housing, and it's just burst out into the open. For months and months, the WhatsApp groups of backbenchers have been plotting and scheming, and they don't like that. They haven't been liking what they've been hearing from the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, that he wants
to build.
He wants to build much more houses.
Secure a generation of future Tory voters.
All of that. The political geometry suggests that once people become homeowners, they're more likely to vote Tory. But of course, a generation of 25 to 34-year-olds now, very few of them are homeowners. And when we were that age, Colin, do you remember? Wasn't so long ago. It was a majority. But what's happened now is that Michael Gove has quietly dropped the target, and there was a Tory manifesto pledge in 2019 to build 300,000 homes each year. We're nowhere near that. And the focus now is on these street votes. Some people think it's a bit gimmicky. It's all about giving local people control rather than a top-down imposed plan from Whitehall, because if you do that, Tories worry that the Lib Dems are going to eat your lunch.
I just wonder whether it might also, Liam, be a recipe for rows over the garden fence a little bit.
I think it could become really divisive. You'll have people on certain streets in parts of big cities that are gentrifying. You'll have people that have been there for generations. They can't afford a big extension. They don't want the disruption. Yeah. So it's almost... And anyway... solving our housing issue is not really about extensions and granny flats. Solving our housing issues is about building lots and lots more homes. It's about forcing the big monopolistic builders who are sitting on planning permissions. They're not just sitting on land, they're sitting on planning permissions. So they get the planning permissions, and that stops smaller builders getting them, and then they sit on them.
And they restrict the supply of houses, and that keeps the price high.
That's
and
right.
They're very happy.
They sit on the planning permissions, so the small builders don't get them, and then they don't build them in many cases. 40% of planning permissions in London, Shelter, the campaigning charity, found, are not actually used. And that means, as you say, they deliberately restrict supply. They then make more money on each house that they do build on a much higher margin, because prices are going up.
Just a thought from Sarah Elliott, who, as an American Conservative, has a totally different view on this, I imagine. It's really bigger country. Here there is this massive fault line, and now, in a sense, the Tories have dealt with Europe. It may be the biggest one they face, between the NIMBYs who say, actually, we like this green and pleasant land, sod off with your ideas of new villages and new towns, garden cities. We're not having them. Let them live up north or whatever. And those who realise, as Liam was saying, that actually, if you don't build new homes for new voters, you face political oblivion in the future.
Exactly. And I mean, I couldn't agree more, but it's also like we're all jammed in. For 2 years, we were locked up in our flats in central London or in the outskirts of South London, wherever, north. And you just need to expand. What's our immigration numbers every year? They're above 10 grand a year.
What is it? No, 7 million extra people in 20 years in the UK.
You need space. And honestly, as an American, I feel sometimes when I land in Heathrow, it's the land of the miniature. I get into a mini car, I go into a mini house, and there's just not to raise a family or to just have a little bit of space.
They're already writing these emails. Tell her to go back then.
Sorry, I love this country, so I'm not going home. Sorry, guys. But I just think we could expand a little bit, give people a little bit more room, and allow them to build their first home. I think that's incredibly important, and we need to have more of an ownership society. We need to have people who have skin in the game, and we need to get them that ladder in, their foot in the door to do that. And yes, we need to build, and we need a third runway in Heathrow. And don't say, oh, you can say that because you don't live over there. I do live over there, and we need a third runway.
Will we get those homes, Liam?
I can't see how they're going to break this deadlock. If even Michael Gove, who is a campaigning Secretary of State...
Who's putting on some funny accents on the telly this morning. Did you hear that? I recommend it. You put
the pressure is getting to him. He is somebody who takes on vested interest, and the property lobby, the developer lobby, the NIMBY lobby, they are a mighty vested interest in not wanting more and more homes built. But look, the numbers are there for independent-minded people who want to find them. 13% of the landmass of England is greenbelt. Yeah, it's more than doubled since 1979 in size. And the percentage of England that is residential property, including gardens, is 2%.
Yeah.
So there is space. Yeah. Obviously, we don't want to be building lots of nasty new build homes, and they're very, very small because the land is so expensive on the edges of beautiful villages. I completely get that. That's vandalism. Yeah. Let's build some new towns. I've been on this earth more than half a century.
Go to Poundbury. Go to Poundbury and Dorset.
People often talk about Poundbury. It's a slight red herring because it's Prince Charles. That is a one-off. We need to build on much, much bigger scale. I've been here for more than 50 years. We haven't built a new town in my lifetime in this country, which is madness.
I'm just going to write that down. I'm going to write the word Poundbury. That sets Liam off. Don't use Poundbury again. Thanks very much, Liam. Thanks for coming in. Coming up, I've got the Brazier angle for you, sharing some personal memories of something that happened 37 years ago today. We'll also debate the big topic of the day after stepping in for the Queen's speech. Is the future of the monarchy safe in Prince Charles's hands? First, the latest news headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. It's 4:30, time for the top stories. The Prime Minister has signed a historic security agreement with Sweden as the country considers joining NATO. He's due to sign a similar declaration with Finland later today. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, has threatened to respond if the two Nordic countries join the military alliance. Boris Johnson said the UK will support Sweden if it decides to apply for NATO membership.
The war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. But sovereign nations must be free to make those decisions without fear or influence or threat of retaliation. So I'm very pleased today with you, Prime Minister Anderson, to sign this mutual security assurances declaration.
An economic think tank is warning Britain is on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. Avon and Somerset police are treating the disappearance of 15-year-old Maddie Thomas as child abduction. The teenager vanished on April the 26th after leaving her foster parents' address in Southmead, Bristol, to say she was going to the shops. Officers believe she is likely to be with a man and they are concerned about her safety. And face masks will no longer be mandatory in airports and on flights in Europe from Monday next week. That's the new recommendation from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and the EU's Aviation Safety Agency. But airlines have been told to encourage passengers to wear face masks on flights to or from countries where it's still required on public transport. Well, TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Back to Brazier in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events And I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, 37 years ago today, I went to see a football match with my extended family of cousins and uncles. It was the final fixture of the 1985 season, and the home team, Bradford City, were playing Lincoln. The ground, Valley Parade, was packed to the rafters. Bradford had already won promotion, and the feeling was joyful, one big party. I was standing in an area known as the Paddock, under the roof of the main grandstand, but where movement was freer, which was, as I'll explain, about to become important, because just before half-time, smoke started to rise from seating a couple of hundred yards to my left. At first, nobody paid much attention, probably just a smoke bomb. But the smoke didn't disappear. In fact, it thickened, and then incomprehensibly, there was the first sight of a flame. My memories of what happened next are sketchy, but I remember with reliable clarity the moment, and it must happen whenever catastrophe strikes a large crowd, when frivolity turns to panic, when grown men stop making jokes and start to flee for their lives. A wall of people started moving towards us, climbing over seats, tripping up, calling out for loved ones. The fire spread with a speed that almost defies explanation. But there was an explanation. Beneath the grandstand floorboards was the accumulated rubbish of decades, old newspapers, food wrappings, empty paint pots. All it took to set the whole thing ablaze was probably a discarded cigarette, and once it took hold, there was no stopping it. The roof contained and recycled the heat in a way that obeyed, I'm sure, the rules of physics, but at the time seemed nothing short of demonic. Some spectators headed to the rear of the stand, thinking that since that was the way they came in, through the turnstiles, that would be where they could get out. However, the gates were locked and dozens perished in that gloomy corridor at the back of the grandstand, where temperatures at one point reached 1,000 degrees. The rest of us headed down towards the pitch, where the playing area and grandstand were only separated by a 4-foot-high wall, thank God. That's all it was. Had the fire happened at one of the grounds where fences had been put up to stop pitch invasions, many hundreds might have been trapped. Running towards the centre circle, I looked back to see an elderly man gazing out from the middle of the grandstand, standing stock still. Remember it very clearly, just before blazing timbers entombed him. I also have a strong memory of the noise, the sheer deafening cacophonous din of a huge fire. You had to shout to be heard. TV pictures of the Valley Parade disaster communicate many things: terror, loss, shock, but they never got across the sheer volume of that inferno. Well, for a couple of minutes, I, in common with thousands of others, moved around the pitch, shouting out for loved ones or gazing in bewilderment at that grandstand, the pictures of which you've just been looking at. I shuffled towards the goalposts at what was known as the Bradford End, for no better reason than that was the way towards the town centre and my bus home. Between the goalposts lay the body of a middle-aged woman about whom I remember nothing more than the way her clothing had warped like burned plastic. As I headed into town to catch my bus, I noticed an old man in front of me with terrible burns, 3rd degree surely, to the back of his neck and his ears. He was walking as if oblivious to his injuries. Perhaps he was in shock, but over the years I've called him to mind, this pensioner in his tweed overcoat and cap who didn't want to make a fuss. He was sort of emblematic of a muted, stoical reaction to the disaster. Different, I think, to what would happen now in our supercharged world of smartphones, social media, and I think it's fair to say sometimes emotional incontinence. That said, there was grumbling in the city when the inquiry into the cause of the blaze was lumped in with a riot, which happened on the same day involving Leeds United fans in Birmingham. That was pretty thoughtless. But somehow outside of the city and football fans more generally, the Bradford fire slid somehow from public consciousness. There was a memorial service today, the first since COVID, and many of those who stood in attendance weren't born in 1985 and would struggle to understand how, in a world where stadia are now highly regulated and policed by an army of stewards, 56 people could set out for a day at the football and not come home. But the past, as they say, is another country, and they do things differently there. That's the Brazier angle. My studio guest today is Sarah Elliott from Republicans Overseas UK. Had you even heard of that, Sarah, as an American?
I have to say no. And I hadn't heard of the other one, Hillsborough.
Yeah.
I had not heard of either of those before I came here 9 years ago. But actually, your story, it's new to me.
Yeah.
As of today.
It's I'm making several points in that, and I don't make any of them with any great force. That idea that it's one of those catastrophes that's sort of fallen from view slightly for reasons. Well, what are the reasons? I mean, one of them could simply be, I mean, there's people, and apologies if you're listening on the radio, we're looking at some of the still images. That might, I mean, that's the low wall I think I'm talking about. I was one of those people who jumped, and that's the goalpost at the Bradford End where I saw the woman's body. One of the reasons I think perhaps it sort of slid slightly from public consciousness was because the TV images, and there were TV cameras there, were so horrific, people literally on fire, that you couldn't replay them. And the images do need to be replayed almost globally for it to become a sort of institutionalised in people's memory somewhat. I was reflecting also on just how different it would be today in a world of smartphones. It would be different, wouldn't it?
And it would be really traumatizing. I mean, it reminds me of 9/11, which was the first major catastrophe where we saw people die on TV, like innocent people on fire, covered in soot, or just their hands, and then their hands disappear from the windows. And you know, I mean, my heart goes out to each family member. I mean, 56 people died that day. Just like you said, they were going to the football match and they never came home, and they never thought that would happen. They need to be remembered. This does need to be talked about, and you need to remember that fire is real, even in this day and age of modernity and, you know, sprinkler alarms and everything like that. These things can still happen, and we need to understand why. And, you know, my heart goes out to you.
Well, no, I mean, no, I'm here. It's fine, isn't it? I mean, what is interesting, and I use the word advisedly, and the thing I still can't quite get my head around, and I think probably in common with many hundreds of people, thousands of people who were there that day, is the incomprehensibility of being somewhere where a fire shouldn't happen. I mean, that seems such a prosaic thing to say, but there are some settings where you expect disaster or accidents. You're on a motorway, you see a car crash, maybe even a car on fire. That's not a surprise. It's what happens. You've gone out for a day at the football to have some fun with your friends, and suddenly you're seeing people on fire. That's the one that is really difficult to get your head around. Anyway, we've done enough on that story, but I think it was important to mention it today on the 37th anniversary of the Bradford fire. We're going to move on to our debate this hour, a moment that was likely to come maybe at some point, the Queen taking a step back and relying on other working royals to step up and take on her constitutional responsibilities. Yesterday, we saw the strongest signs of that as Prince Charles presented the Queen's speech to Parliament, setting out the government's agenda for the year. Mounting and much documented health problems, of course, have stopped Her Majesty from undertaking her full duties over the last few months, but at the age of 96, who can blame her for taking a step back? So in comes next in line Prince Charles, and our question, what the future of the monarchy is looking like with the Prince of Wales stepping into the Queen's shoes. Is it safe, the monarchy, in Prince Charles's hands? We're joined by the author and broadcaster Amy Nicol and the former royal butler to Prince Charles, Grant Harold, with whom we start. Grant, welcome to you today. Safe in Prince Charles's hand, the institution of monarchy? Some people think not.
Good afternoon, Colin. Thank you for on the show. I think it is in safe hands because, from a personal point of view, I knew him and got to know what he's like as a person. And from that basis, and seeing how he is with people, what he feels about things, which a lot of those kind of feelings are known publicly because he spoke about it over the years, I feel that the monarchy is in safe hands. And when people say to me, should he become the next king? Should it pass on to his son? I think it should pass on directly to Prince Charles and then to his son, as it should be. I don't think Prince Charles would ever want to pass on the burden, if I can use that word, of monarchy to his son when he knows it's his responsibility to take it on first, because they do see it as a job that they undertake and they should fulfil until their death, when it passes on to the next in line to the throne.
Amy, there's never been a better prepared heir to the throne.
Look, he might be very well prepared. And also, I just want to say before I start, I don't want to make this personal. I don't want to make this about the personality of Prince Charles. To me, that's completely irrelevant. I think that having Grant as the other guest is actually perfectly illustrative of the absolute problems that we have within the monarchy. So he's a former butler, a taxpayer-funded butler for a man that was born into a job. By birthright, he has a butler that we pay for.
But they're not. No, that's not true.
That's completely true.
Well, Grant can help me on this, but this is. I speak as a former royal correspondent. Did the gig for a couple of years, and there is a misunderstanding about this, that taxpayers' money is used to provide things like security.
No, it's not. The grant
comes from the Crown estate, which was land, including, for instance, lots of land on Regent Street, places like that the Crown gave over to the monarch gave over to the Crown estate, and from that is derived an income. Grant, help me. I'm meant to be refereeing this, not coming down on one side or the other. Help me if you can.
To be honest, it's not. So I never kind of queried where my wage exactly came from, so it's a bit difficult to say. But I was,
as long as you got them on time.
I was always under the impression it was part of the funds that they are given, and then obviously they use it, as you've mentioned, for security and things. I never kind of went back and said, where does my wage actually come from? Maybe I should have. But on saying that, I mean, I think this is something I'm very aware that people are concerned about money, where it's spent. I understand that, Amy, because that is something I've been asked over the years. When you hear about different things that money's spent on, what is it spent on? And, people want to know that the money has been put to good use. I would like to think if butlers or staff were part of that, I would like to think hopefully we are of help, because the one thing that Prince Charles used to kind of say to me is that having people like myself around, it helped him be able to carry out his duties. Now, that might sound to some people a very grand thing, but the reality is we're not just there to kind of serve meals. You're also there to kind of support them, as Colin probably might have seen from his time as a royal correspondent. We're there to support them and to help them and carry out other engagements from day to day.
Why does an unelected posh person who's basically got the job by randomness of jury service selection deserve to have a state-funded life? On this channel, we talk about misspent taxpayer money quite often. I think the royal family cost £82 million a year. Yes, they bring in 19 billion, but that would not change. That would not change by removing the individuals. It's basically like, look at this. Look what happens in France. In France,
well, there's a few points there.
No, because you scoffed at that.
No, I did, and I'll explain.
I want to explain why it's relevant.
I'll explain why. Well, forgive me if I scoffed, because the point for me is that London. We could walk from here, Amy, in several directions, and it wouldn't take us very long to reach the home of a plutocrat or an oligarch who is worth billions of pounds. And they put back into society what? Absolutely nothing.
This is a completely different debate. If you want to talk about the royal family at the moment, they're costing £85 million.
And you've already said they bring in
that is going up. Yeah, and the fact that the money that they bring in, I'm not saying get rid of the tradition. I'm saying get rid of the individuals that we're bankrolling.
I'm going to try and reset this. We're meant to be talking about Prince Charles. Will he make a decent
if we want to go back to Prince Charles, Prince Charles will make a fragile royal family even more fragile, particularly in the Commonwealth countries, where they are increasing in unpopularity, which is something you and I have discussed before, and that they have a distinct problem with not the Queen, not Prince Philip, but with the royals that
and I agree with you. Amy, listen, I'm going to shock you. I'm going to agree with you. I think it's an anachronism. I think it's a painful anachronism, and I think the royal family should get ahead of the curve on this and start to sever some of those ties with Commonwealth countries. It's been very much the Queen's pet project, and I don't think it goes beyond her reign. Look, Grant, we've rather neglected you. We were just reflecting on how you were paid. Let's reflect on Prince Charles.
100 grand a year, apparently. So there you go.
Amy, I wish it was that.
on the Prince of Wales's worthiness for the role, he's been a long time learning the ropes.
I mean, this is one of the arguments I always say. He's the longest Prince of Wales in history. He's created a role that didn't exactly exist. And, I've witnessed how he's developed that. I was only there for a short period of time compared to his overall being Prince of Wales. But I mean, what I witnessed was somebody that's very caring and compassionate. And what people don't see, and this is what's difficult for me, is behind the closed doors, you see a very compassionate and caring individual. And I know over the years they've said that he meddles and he gets involved in things that possibly, and probably quite rightly, that monarchs, kings, queens shouldn't. And I like to think that when he becomes king, that he will follow that same rule, because I think it's important. But on saying that, he's still going to be passionate and want to get involved in things that he cares about in order to try to help people, because that's something I've witnessed. That side, I've seen him get involved in things and helping people out over the years, and you don't hear about it. But I've witnessed it.
Prince Charles has actively lobbied for environmental issues, which, in my opinion, are good, but who knows where his political sway might change. The thing about the Queen is that she's clear with her impartiality. Will Prince Charles continue to be? And then you have the case where you have an unelected person in charge of what? And a highly paid mascot is ultimately what we are discussing here. Who cares if he's a kind, compassionate man? What's the role? What's the point?
We're out of time. It's a shame. We had a lot to go on there. Amy and Grant, we really appreciate your time. I'm just tempted to get 30 seconds from an American who will tell us whether monarchy has a role in a modern democracy. Sarah Elliott, let us know.
I think it has a role in this democracy, not in America's democracy. But I think
we weren't planning on reinstalling.
We weren't going to let you, just FYI. But I think that the monarchy is probably in good hands up until Prince George, and then after that, it's a massive question mark. I think Prince Charles has been training for this his whole life. When most of his friends are retiring, he finally gets his job. So let him have it, and he'll do it for 15 years,
and
maybe.
He'll just have swans, because that's basically the only thing they actually
Amy, I'm going to get somebody to come and cart you out of the studio. It'd be very nice for you to come in.
And a free driving licence, did you know?
Thanks very much indeed.
Does he? Yeah. They don't have to do a driving test.
We're going to take the weather. Here it comes. Here's the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Rain eases across southern parts of the UK during the rest of the day. Further showers in the north, however, but with increasing clear spells developing in many places overnight. A weather front has approached from the southwest, and that's brought some wet weather across Wales, the southwest, and increasingly the Midlands, eastern and southern England through the early part of the afternoon. And during the rest of the day, that rain sweeps through the southeast, with some lively downpours following for Lincolnshire and East Anglia. But they're out of the way by the night time, and then clear spells for many, but further showers will affect northern and western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well, and a bit of a breeze overnight. A cooler night to come, nevertheless, with those clear spells compared to recent nights. Temperatures down to 4 Celsius in sheltered parts of Scotland and mid to high single figures elsewhere. But plenty of sunshine on offer first thing Thursday, especially across England and Wales. I think cloud will build through the morning, and a few showers will develop across Wales and the southwest. More especially, Scotland and Northern Ireland will see some showers and longer spells at times, particularly the northwest of Scotland. 13 Celsius here, 20 still possible in London, given the increased amounts of sunshine compared to Wednesday. and then clear spells for many overnight once again, but further cloud and rain will push through northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland at times. By the end of the night, confined to the northern half of Scotland. With the cloud and again a bit of a breeze, a little milder compared to Wednesday night. Temperatures by dawn on Friday looking like 10 to 12 Celsius in the south and 8 or 9 further north. A wet start for central and northern Scotland, however. Spells of rain through the day, turning more showery, and a few showers will break out a little further south as well. But actually, for much of England and Wales, it's another dry and bright day, and that bright, fine weather becomes more widespread on Saturday and Sunday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
5 to 5, time we discuss 5 things that we think you need to know before 5 o'clock. How helpful of us. Today, everything from a rivalry between two wags to the UK's biggest ever lottery win at 5. Could we see Donald Trump make a return to Twitter? Elon Musk has said he will reverse Twitter's ban on the former US president if the Tesla boss completes a takeover of the social media platform. Twitter permanently banned Trump back in January 2021, saying he repeatedly violated the company's rules, but when last asked, Trump stated he would not return to Twitter, even were his account reinstated. At 4, more revelations and accusations on day 2 of the so-called Wagatha Christie trial at the High Court. Rebecca Vardy suing Colleen Rooney for libel. Vardy told the High Court she did not leak stories about Rooney to the press. The trial's expected to last for 7 days. Our reporter Ellie Costello will talk to you about it in just a tick. At 3, Cornwall is set to join the space race when it launches 2 shoebox-sized satellites for the British government this summer. The mini cube-shaped satellites will deliver high-tech imaging sensors, allowing the Ministry of Defence to monitor Earth and the seas to strengthen, quote, defence capabilities. At 2, should you be flagging this afternoon and need a caffeine pick-me-up, then perhaps pause before pouring an espresso. Academics in Norway have found that drinking espressos could cause high cholesterol levels in men, but not in women. The researchers examined found that cholesterol varies depending on the brewing method, with significant differences between men and women. Apparently, the filter stuff's less bad for you. Finally, at 1, there's been a record lottery win in the lottery, with one British ticket holder taking home £184 million. It's the Euro Millions jackpot. That makes them the biggest ever national lottery winner in the UK. Not yet claimed. Those are the 5 things you might want to know before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Let's then turn to the Wagatha Christie trial. GB News reporter Ellie Costello is covering this at the Royal Courts of Justice in London. Ellie.
Well, Rebecca Vardy broke down in tears this afternoon as the mention of online trolls targeting her children was brought up by Colleen Rooney's lawyers. She was asked if she wanted a few minutes break and she said no, that she would carry on. It wouldn't make any difference. But of course, it seems as though the intensity of this cross-examination is clearly getting to her. Earlier in the same cross-examination, Rebecca Vardy admitted that she once attempted to leak a story about the drink-driving footballer Danny Drinkwater to a journalist at The Sun newspaper. She is, of course, in court suing Colleen Rooney for libel after Mrs. Rooney accused Rebecca Vardy of selling her private stories to The Sun newspaper. Now, in a WhatsApp conversation read out in court, Rebecca Vardy was sending information to her agent Caroline Watt about Danny Drinkwater, and she added, "I want paying for this." When she was told that The Sun newspaper already had the story, Rebecca Vardy replied that she was fuming she hadn't got to her agent earlier. Now, she told the High Court that she doesn't regularly leak stories to the press, but she just considered it on this occasion as a fleeting thought and to expose a drink driver to the public. Other WhatsApp conversations were also raised, which were all dismissed by Vardy as a joke, a typo, or not serious conversations. All of these WhatsApp conversations concerned other celebrities and questions of leaking stories. So Rebecca Vardy also admitted this afternoon that her agent was directed by her on more than one occasion to look at Colleen Rooney's private Instagram. She admitted yesterday in court under oath that it would be wrong for Miss Watts to have access to Colleen Rooney's private Instagram via Rebecca Vardy's account, but she did admit this afternoon that she did direct her agent to look at it after Colleen Rooney had a car crash. So it was a very intense cross-examination this afternoon, Colin, and it will continue tomorrow morning.
Ellie Costello, thanks very much indeed, Ellie, joining us there from the High Court in a rainy central London. Coming up at around about 5:20, we think today, Boris Johnson. He's in Finland, he's talking about security, he's copping for a lot of flack, as we are, through his interventions in Ukraine. From the Russians, they don't like it. They don't like the fact that the UK is offering support of a very tangible nature for countries which have been neutral before, Sweden and Finland. The Prime Minister's press conference at 5:20. We'll bring it to you. It's 5 o'clock. Coming up this hour, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing a new declaration to solidify European security. Earlier, he met the Swedish Prime Minister. He's now travelling to Finland. I suspect he's in Finland, in fact, to sign a similar agreement. We'll bring you his press conference live at around about 5:20 this afternoon. We'll bring you reaction as I'm joined by Conservative MP Ian Duncan-Smith, former Tory party leader, and a former British Army officer, Major General Tim Cross. And is the Rwanda scheme full steam ahead? The first Channel migrants have been told by Priti Patel that they're being sent to Rwanda. It's been reported some asylum seekers have gone into hiding for fear of being sent there. First, the latest news headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 5:01. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has promised to support Sweden if it comes under attack, signing a historic security agreement with the country. He's due to sign a similar declaration with Finland shortly. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted both Nordic countries to consider joining NATO. Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to respond, though, if they join the military alliance. But Boris Johnson says the UK will support Sweden if it decides to apply for membership.
The war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. But sovereign nations must be free to make those decisions without fear or influence or threat of retaliation. So I'm very pleased today with you, Prime Minister Anderson, to sign this mutual security assurances declaration.
Well, in Ukraine, new drone footage shows a Russian tank being destroyed in the Kharkiv region as the country pushes a counter-offensive in the north. Ukraine's Ministry of Defence claims the attack was carried out on Russia's most advanced tank. UK military intelligence says Ukraine has successfully struck Russian air defences and resupplied vessels with drones. Defence Minister Leo Doherty told MPs the UK must be prepared for the war to last a very long time. An economic think tank warns Britain is on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. Helen Barnard from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation told GBNews the government's existing support package of £22 billion doesn't go far enough.
I think it's extraordinary that they are saying it's fine, everything's okay, we'll wait till the autumn, because for people at the very sharpest end of this, they are missing, essentials now. They're getting into debt now. Their health is getting hammered now. Their mental health is getting eroded by that constant anxiety of how on earth am I going to feed the family and keep things going?
Well, meanwhile, millions of renters living in unsafe conditions should have their homes improved under major housing reforms. The Levelling Up Secretary announced the new Renters Reform Bill will be extended to nearly 4.5 million households. The plans will help tenants living in damp, unsafe and cold homes and protect them from eviction notices without reason. Michael Gove also announced an overhaul of planning permission regulations, which could see neighbours voting on home developments, including extensions in their street. The Foreign Secretary says the UK will not shy away from taking action over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Liz Truss says proposals put forward by the EU would take the country backwards and cause more checks, paperwork and disruption. The DUP is refusing to form a devolved government in Northern Ireland until issues with the protocol are resolved. Sinn Féin's Vice President, Michelle O'Neill, says it's unacceptable for the DUP to block the nomination of a new Speaker to Stormont. Avon and Somerset police are treating the disappearance of 15-year-old Maddie Thomas as child abduction. The teenager vanished on April the 26th after leaving her foster parents' address in Southmead, Bristol, to say she was going to the shops. Officers believe she's likely to be with a man and they are concerned about her safety. Two former police officers jailed for taking pictures of murdered sisters Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman at a London crime scene have been attacked in prison. During an appeal against their sentences, judges were told 48-year-old Dennis Jaffa has been attacked 3 times, whilst 33-year-old Jamie Lewis has been assaulted twice. Both were jailed for 2 years and 9 months in December after pleading guilty to misconduct in a public office. Jaffa and Lewis both lost their appeals. And face masks will no longer be mandatory in airports and on flights in Europe from Monday next week. That's the new recommendation from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and the EU's Aviation Safety Agency. But airlines have been told to encourage passengers to wear face masks on flights to or from countries where it's still required on public transport. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
Let's just mark your card straight away. Later this hour, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be speaking live in Finland. He's there with the country's president, talking about European security. Already this afternoon, he's appeared alongside the Swedish Prime Minister to confirm the two countries would come to each other's aid in a time of crisis. We're not talking economic crisis, we're talking military crisis, obviously. The Prime Minister made the comments amid discussions with Sweden and Finland joining NATO, despite the fact they've remained neutral throughout large parts of the Cold War. Let's discuss this with the former British Army officer, Major General Tim Cross, regular contributor here. Tim Cross, welcome to you. This will feel to some Russians like an expansion, almost a land grab by NATO powers. If you're sitting in Finland looking at your 250-mile border with Russia, it feels very necessary, I imagine.
Yeah, it does. I'm sure Russia will make a big issue out of this. I mean, we need to again put it in the context of, for example, Putin's speech on Monday, which largely was not about Ukraine. It was about his concerns and his anger, really, at NATO as a whole. And their line, and it is a line that Russia has taken for a long time, and Putin is but, one of a number of Russian leaders who have played this tune, if you like, sung this song that NATO is pushing up hard against Russia borders, and that it is NATO that is threatening Russia, not the other way around. Russian paranoia goes back a long way. I mean, literally centuries. But there's no doubt at all that in his mind, this will be a very negative thing and probably quite a worrying thing. I happen to believe it's the right thing to do, and we shouldn't kowtow to him. But nonetheless, we have to understand these issues from Putin's perspective. I don't think I've used this expression before with you, Colin, but there's an expression by Sun Tzu, which goes back 2,500 years, which says, if you know your enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the outcome of 1,000 battles. Now, knowing ourselves is one issue, but knowing our enemy, understanding our enemy, not condoning their view, but understanding where they come from, why do they take the line they do, is really important. And understanding Putin is not easy. But many military commanders in World War II, and indeed since, have had photographs of the key commanders they're fighting against, literally on the walls in their, in their battle box and caravans and so forth, trying to get a feel for how these people will react and how their campaign will draw out. So we do need to understand Putin. We do need to recognise that's how he's going to see it. It doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be doing it, but nonetheless we do need to tread carefully.
And what we will learn a bit more about, presumably when we get the live signal from Finland, assuming it starts on time at 5:20, is the sense to which we will be on the hook militarily, to what extent we are offering undertakings to countries who, let's not forget, didn't go all in during the dark days of the Cold War, chose to remain neutral for their own domestic reasons. I think there's probably a gathering sense that some of those high-minded Scandinavian principles of neutrality have rather fallen away because of recent events. But until we actually hear what's been announced, it's difficult to arrive at a judgment.
Yes, it is. I mean, they're not alone in that, of course. Ireland has been was neutral throughout the Second World War, and Austria traditionally has been neutral and was neutral during the Cold War. Now, whether we're talking about Putin reacting militarily is one thing, but I'm not convinced that that is immediate threat anyway. I mean, you may remember that Russia tried to invade Finland just at the beginning of the Second World War and got a very bloody nose. And the way things are happening in Ukraine, the idea that they're going to put in another offensive in the north, I just don't think is going to happen. But nonetheless, they can respond in other ways. This is a bilateral mutual agreement between the UK and Sweden and then Finland. Obviously, a preamble may be to them joining NATO subsequently, and it's a serious agreement. But I don't see it initially as being one that we're going to have to suddenly find ourselves deploying a brigade into Sweden to help them fight off an incursion.
Tim Cross, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks as ever for your expertise. Really appreciate it. We can see the live picture from Finland. We'll be sharing it with you. Apologies if you're listening on the radio, but you'll be able to listen to the words of Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, in Finland talking. There it is. There it is, the Finnish and the Finnish flags. And some EU flags. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. Always happy to see an EU flag, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. It brings me back to 2016.
Yeah. I bet it does. In terms of what Boris what the Prime Minister is going to announce today, I was just saying to Tim Cross, I mean, until you actually see the written document, we do not know what we're on the hook for, do we?
Right. And actually, what we're on the hook for, I would hope, would be debated in Parliament. I kind of have a problem with these kind of big, grandiose, executive kind of decisions being thrown around.
There's not always time, Sarah. There isn't always time.
Is that the argument they give? Oh, that sounds relatively familiar. I'm sure China uses that argument often.
Well, I know what you're going to say. In 1940, Churchill would always submit himself to parliamentary scrutiny, wouldn't he? In the dark days of the Blitz and the Battle of Britain, it was still the case that we argued policy out in the parliamentary chamber.
Of course, because that's a democracy, and that's how you build goodwill. It's how you bring people with you. It's called leadership. And I'm quite critical of the COVID way things were done, but I have that could set a precedent for, executive leadership without proper debate.
Speaking of the Battle of Britain, I think our next guest's father flew Spitfires in the Battle of Britain. He is Ian Duncan-Smith, the former leader of the Conservative Party, who I think can join us now. Ian Duncan-Smith, welcome to you. Correct me if I'm wrong about your father flying in the Battle of Britain. It's not necessarily relevant to our conversation now about Finland and the Prime Minister. What do you expect to hear from him? What do you want to hear from him?
Well, if you want to know about my father, which is quite important, he flew all the way through the war. He was a fighter pilot, one of the aces, and he had 5 gallantry medals. Wow. 2 DSOs and 3 DFCs, which was almost unrivaled. So I'm very proud of him. But yeah. Well, we all should be. On to Finland. What do you hope we'll hear? I hope what we'll hear is that Finland and Sweden have decided that they need to be part of the alliance. I hope and believe that the UK will have been probably the most active partner in trying to bring them in. I think throughout the whole of the Ukraine crisis, the UK has, I think, led the way, which is, I'm going to go on about Brexit or anything else, but the important thing is the UK was free to start the sanctions process first, and that has led the way. So I hope we've led the way on this as well. But I see the Prime Minister now speaking, so I don't know if you want to go to him first.
No, we've foxed you, Ian Duncan-Smith. We've foxed you there. That's him speaking in Sweden. We might be able to show the lectern, the live position, which is empty at the moment, but he's about to, I'm told in the next 5 or so minutes. So there we go. That's the gathering of the press and the lecterns and the flags awaiting the arrival of the Prime Minister. Ian Duncan-Smith, I wonder if you can just help me with one thing. If we're talking about full-blown NATO membership or an aspiration to attain that at some future time, can you just remind us of what that actually does involve? And I say it with particular reference to what's something Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP leader, said recently, who has a hope that she can, if we have partition and Scotland becomes independent, that Scotland would still enjoy NATO protection. But isn't it the case that as a NATO member, you're obliged to accept in a crisis nuclear missiles on your territory, which does seem at odds with those countries, if Scotland becomes one of them under the SNP, who say, actually, we don't want any nuclear weapons on our soil at all?
Yes, I think there's lots of issues around Scotland's independence potential, but one of them, of course, is the fact that they tend towards a neutrality position, I think. Ireland is in a position of neutrality, but you're quite right that the point about NATO is you collectively accept the obligation to defend each other with whatever means, and you accept also the requirement, as agreed at NATO, to spend a proportion of your GDP on defence requirements that are integrated, and you also accept full integration in the command and control structures that NATO has, which means you have to train with those. So all of those are big commitments, and big commitments, particularly for nations that have been independent for some considerable time. But yeah, those are all big commitments. And Article 5 is critical, which is if one nation is attacked, all nations are attacked and respond equally, which is the last time this was produced was during, of course, the strike on the Twin Towers and on other parts of the US infrastructure. We invoked Article 5 for the first time since the Second World War, and we were all supposed to be on the side of the United States in trying to resolve the terrorist threat.
How disappointed were you not to see defence play a bigger part in the 38 bills that were presented in the Queen's speech yesterday? And to what extent might it be possible for energetic Conservative backbenchers like yourself to gather together in the way that they did, for instance, on COVID and European matters, to insist to the government that they need to get GDP, a percentage of GDP, up to, say, 3-4% on defence spending, and to make some tough choices to make that happen?
Well, I think it's a given that the government will go to 3%. I think you don't need a bill for that, by the way. It would be in the budget. and most people will support that. I think NATO is going to have to go to 3% full stop, which is why I think it's a given. It may be actually slightly more. The one thing about this Ukraine crisis is it's reminded a very complacent free world that these freedoms are not free. They have to be, you have to prepare to fight for them. And what we've done is we've dealt, I think, too long. We've dealt with the world as we wish it would be, not prepared to deal with the world as it is. When you're dealing with totalitarian states like Russia, like China, like North Korea, like Iran, these places are what they are. What you see is what you get. And when they say they're going to do something, almost invariably they end up doing it. Our problem is, diplomatically, we want to believe that it's possible they won't, and they don't mean this, and we overinterpret. Truth is, live with the world as it is, make sure that we have the right defense structures to deal with that, and make sure we're all united in doing that. And Germany has been the biggest shock of all, which is that it really hasn't spent anything like the money it's meant to. And it certainly hasn't made sure its equipment is serviceable or its aircraft are really combat ready. So, this was all discovered at the time when Russia invaded Ukraine. It became very heavily exposed. And now they've decided to change that, which is good news. But we need to all work together.
Ian Duncan-Smith, I know you're going to stay with us, or at least listening to what the Prime Minister's got to say. So for now, we'll say thanks very much indeed for your thoughts and look forward to speaking to you again in a wee while. Sarah Elliott's alongside me to reflect on what Ian Duncan-Smith's got to say about defence spending. He thinks it's a given that we'll be looking at 3% of GDP.
Well, I hope you tell the French and the Germans that they can't even get to 2%. But freedom is not free, and that's a wonderful reminder. And, there's a reason why we can wake up every morning and go to work and live our lives and make plans for 6 months in advance or a year in advance. And that's because men and women died to prevent tyranny in this country. And we have to have peace through strength. We have to have determined. This is why we have nuclear weapons. This is why we beef up our defenses so that people will not feel they can take advantage of us. And I know in this day and age where we should be all about peace and love, which I think should be the way, we still have to be realistic.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. Just before we move on to another story, keep across this channel live. Boris Johnson in Finland. Big announcement, we're told, with regards to common security apparatus in Europe. We'll move on to this story, squeeze it in as best we can. Some asylum seekers in Britain are going into hiding to avoid deportation, so says a report from the British Red Cross and the Refugee Council. The organisations have said that the plans to send refugees, or asylum seekers rather, to Rwanda were having a, quote, detrimental impact on their physical and psychological health. Comes in the same week that the Home Office started to send notices of intent to remove migrants, albeit in small numbers, to avoid legal challenges, which do seem imminent. Let's talk to Dr. Peter Walsh, who's a senior researcher at the Migration Observatory at Oxford University. Welcome to you. The legal challenges, should we start with those first? I mean, there is an expectation that the theory of moving for processing or post-processing to Rwanda is one thing, hypothetically. In reality, it may be very different.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the financial and logistical challenges that critics have particularly highlighted. But it's true, there are potential legal challenges too, and they will revolve around whether sending these people to Rwanda risks exposing them to a serious threat to their life or liberty. That's the core principle that's at risk of being violated, that's in the Refugee Convention. There might also be challenges as well on human rights grounds if there are concerns that people sent to Rwanda will have their human rights violated, and that would typically mean either arbitrary detention or a risk that they'll be exposed to inhuman or degrading treatment. And this is really off the back of criticism that has been levelled at Rwanda in recent years regarding its human rights record.
I mean, I suppose the government might say, government supporters will say, well, that's kind of the point, isn't it? That's the objective. You're sending out a deterrent effect. If somebody has faced persecution, they've made it into Europe, they can claim asylum in Greece, in France, in Italy, Spain, wherever. They need to come and join a diaspora in the UK. We understand why they want to do that. We'd probably do it ourselves. But it's not about saving their skins. It's about improving their conditions.
And the government has been quite clear that this is the main aim of this policy. It is a deterrent policy. But there have been questions raised about whether it will have the deterrent effect that the government hopes, and a lot of that criticism has rested on the capacity of the Rwandan facility. You mentioned that people are only going to be sent there in small numbers. There have been reports that suggest the capacity is perhaps in the low hundreds. And if small boat arrivals continue in the thousands or tens of thousands, that does suggest that the chance of being sent to Rwanda will be relatively small, which will figure into the calculus made by these immigrants who have demonstrated that they are quite desperate to reach the UK.
Yeah. Does it matter to you, Peter, that desperation in some instances clearly, and it can be demonstrated, comes from a genuine fear of persecution, or that in many instances, and this is what people, the polling suggests, that people are infuriated by, is the sight of people making that journey, dangerous journey through people traffickers, to improve their financial circumstances. And we need to be honest that is, there is a proportion of both those things involved.
There absolutely is, and we see that all around the world, that there are some people who are unsuccessful in their asylum claims. But what's really interesting to see is that if we look last year at the government's own data, out of all the decisions they made on asylum claims, 7 in 10, they said, meet the criteria for protection. So quite astonishing, really, and it rather raises questions about government claims that some sizable majority of Channel migrants are economic migrants. The data actually suggests that hasn't been the case.
Peter Walsh is a senior researcher at the Migration Observatory at Oxford University. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Sarah Elliott's alongside me to reflect on this one. The doctor there saying the numbers are small. I would argue, yes, but the optics are big, and when the message goes out, there will be inevitably a deterrent effect. I know Rwanda is more advanced than many people imagine, given the hideous genocide of the early mid-1990s. But it's not somewhere, when you talk to a people smuggler, that you intend to end up, is it?
No, I'm not sure what their healthcare system is like, which I know is quite attractive to many people coming here. Listen, I think it kind of came out of the blue. It's kind of a random policy, but it's an idea. It could have a deterrent effect. I think it is to some degree. I mean, people are kind of going underground or going into the black economy because they don't want to be shipped away. So clearly, if they don't desire to leave, I think it needs to be tried out. You also need to have the capacity, because just as the doctor said, if there's not enough capacity, that will get back to the migrants. So you have to really be prepared to execute this really well.
And the problem, it seems to me very often, Sarah, is that, I don't know, I didn't get round to talking to the doctor about it, but very often people say there are alternatives. Well, let's talk to the French. Well, no, sometimes the French talk to us, sometimes they don't. If you really want to take control of this, and be the author of your own destiny, you can't rely on others. And that means having a third-party location where you can process applications, whether that's Ascension, Channel Islands,
right,
or Rwanda.
We had Ellis Island in the US, everyone had to go through there, and if you didn't pass the health checks, you weren't allowed in, Everybody held their breath as they walked in. I still hold my breath when I go through immigration control in this country, It's kind of a nerve-wracking process, but you have to have a policy and you have to think outside the box. Clearly, nothing has been working, and it's only increasing. And we don't have the resources as a country to just have open borders.
No, and the polling's clear on this. People
want control.
Hate the idea. People hate the idea of people getting the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory's golden ticket, British citizenship, by dint of just deciding they want to move here. I'd like to move. There's been times in my life I've wanted to move to America.
Yeah, sure.
I couldn't.
Yeah. I've had American friends try to make it work here and couldn't. It's quite difficult, actually, as an American to move here and start a life here.
OK, Sarah Elliott for now. Thanks very much indeed. We've shown you the lectern. We'll be going there soon, we hope, to listen to Boris Johnson addressing various questions about European security and Britain's role within that. We're going to be joined now by Ian Duncan-Smith, former Conservative Party leader, and Tim Cross, former Major General in the Royal Logistics Corps, wasn't it, Tim Cross? We'll start with you. What do you hope to hear from the Prime Minister this afternoon?
Well, I suspect it'll be a almost the same as happened in Sweden. It'll be an agreement that if Finland is put under pressure, in inverted commas, by Russia, that we will help and assist, and that would be a mutual agreement. Now, the chances of Finland having to come to our rescue is slightly different to us going to theirs. And as I said earlier, we shouldn't forget that Finland is pretty good at resisting Russian invasions. They gave them a very bloody nose back at the beginning of the Second World War. So obviously it's a very important signal that's being sent here. In pushing back against Putin and what he was saying at his victory parade about the threat of NATO and the encirclement and so forth, what we are sending, what Boris Johnson is sending and others, is a message that says, look, this is a defensive alliance. Neutral countries have been taken aback, in inverted commas, by what you've been doing in Ukraine. They are not prepared to sit back and do nothing. They wish to join with us to make sure that we are capable of holding our own ground, in inverted commas, and defending liberal democracy, which, as Ian said earlier, needs defending. I mean, we can easily forget that the majority of the world, actually quite a large majority of the world, does not live under what we consider to be normal day-to-day business, liberal freedom, democracy, and all those other things. A large chunk of the world is living under dictatorships and very difficult circumstances, and we need to be prepared to defend it. And we need to send a message to Russia that says other nations are not prepared to allow you to just dominate in the way that you're trying to do so.
Ian Duncan-Smith, it will seem to a lot of people that this situation, the crisis we're in, would look different, better or worse, were Boris Johnson and Britain not playing such an assertive role internationally. I just wonder what you think, how you think things would look. For instance, it's a bit counterfactual, if Britain right now had been led, let's say, by Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay, if Britain had been led by Jeremy Corbyn, then we would be, I think, at the moment, all over the place, because Jeremy Corbyn himself has, on endless occasions, been unable to condemn Russia for any of its actions, the murders, the Skripal poisonings, the other murders that have taken place in the UK and abroad. He has been incredibly reluctant in the past to criticize Russia at all. The second thing, of course, is Jeremy Corbyn himself never had any time for NATO. He was forced to do a sort of quasi support for NATO when he was leader, but he's never been at all keen on NATO. And I would be at all surprised if the Labour government at that stage, if it would be a Labour government, would have been quite so assertive. Almost certainly not.
My point isn't to poke fun at Jeremy Corbyn. It's just to try and imagine how this crisis would look if Britain hadn't played the role that it so obviously has played in galvanising opposition to Russian aggression.
Well, I can tell you, I was in Lithuania quite relatively recently, and I had a meeting with a very, very senior minister in the government. And they said to me quite simply, and honestly, to goodness, it was straightforward. It was really fascinating. They said, look, when you left the EU, we were worried because we in Eastern Europe thought of you as our friends, and we wondered who would stand up for us when the other bigger countries start throwing their weight around within the councils. And then when Russia invaded Ukraine, we rejoiced because, having left, you became an incredibly strong advocate for immediate action. You didn't have to wait for the European collectively to decide what to do. You led the way, you imposed the sanctions first, and then you went to the European Union, to Germany and to France, and they said you helped push Germany over the line on the SWIFT banking system, and you helped counterbalance the French meddling, as far as they saw it, with trying to find some kind of arrangement or deal. And so all of that, they said, we may have lost a friend in the councils, but we've gained a very powerful friend on the international stage. And I think that was quite important. So they themselves have said this. And you saw the other day, Ukraine made a very special, a particular point of picking out the UK and saying that it is the UK that they consider to have been their greatest and strongest ally because it led the way in this. And I'm enormously pleased that that is the case, because that is a role I've always felt is our natural role, to bring all these countries together in NATO to defend what we should be defending from the word go. And by the way, the British government also had to put some pressure on the American government to do things like the SWIFT banking system cancellations, and that was very important. So, yeah, Boris Johnson's done well on this.
Tim Cross,
We shouldn't forget either.
Sorry, Tim Cross. Ian Duncan was saying a few moments ago that his expectation is that we will have 3% of British GDP spent on defence soon. I just wonder, if you were running the show, where that money ought to go. Do you expect big deployments of British personnel in countries like Finland and Sweden?
Well, I think first of all, I agree with him. I think we do need to move to 3%. And if I may just add to an earlier comment, we shouldn't forget either that Britain, under the current, and I don't say this from a political point of view, but was engaged in Ukraine long before February the 24th. We trained a lot of Ukrainian military, and we provided crucial anti-tank capabilities in particular that really did swing the balance in those early days. So I think we need to acknowledge the reality of that. We also need to think it through that the distinction between what the EU is trying to do.
Tim Cross, forgive me. We're going to go over to Finland now. The Prime Minister is about to address the waiting journalist there in Helsinki.
Of the UK-Finland statement, it is signed by the President of Finland, Sauli Niinistö, and Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson.
OK, we're just having pen to paper. The Prime Minister putting the cap back on his fountain pen. The important thing is what's been signed. To what extent is there a mutual defence obligation between the UK, NATO member, powerful NATO member, one of the biggest defence spenders in the world, by some analyses, second or third biggest spender on defence budgets, and to what extent that will mean that Britain has to go to the aid of Finland or Sweden, where the Prime Minister was earlier today, in the event of a Russian military incursion. We're going to keep across those pictures, and we're going to bring in the voices beneath those pictures of Ian Duncan Smith, the former Conservative Party leader. We may need to break off at any moment as they address the microphones. Ian Duncan Smith... Tim Cross is... In fact, are they about to approach the lecterns? Not quite. Tim Cross... Yeah. No, in fact, no, let's not bother. Let's just go straight to what the Prime Minister's saying.
Shall I start? Okay. And now follow statements by the President and Prime Minister. President Niinistö, please.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Prime Minister Boris, thank you. It's very valuable to have you here, and we have had a very good conversation. Continuing that, we already started in London.
At the Jeff?
Yep, in Jeff. I've learned that one always measures friendships by how they show up in bad weather. They say this is attributed to Winston Churchill. Maybe you know better whether that is or not, but nevertheless, it describes the situation today in Europe. We are great friends, Finland and UK, and strong security partners. We signed joint statement. We will stand together and support each other in any circumstances, in good and bad weather. Deepen the cooperation we already have in CEF, specifically on defense, hybrid threats, other critical areas of security. That's what we are doing. Here in Finland, we appreciate UK's strong support to NATO's open door policy and Finland's potential membership. That is also very valuable to us. And I told that after my visit in London, it was very encouraging for us to hear your opinions and your support. These decisions, they strengthen our own security here in Finland and that of Europe and that of the whole NATO world, especially if we join. For us, joining NATO would be not against anybody. We would like to maximize our security in way or another while thinking membership in NATO, but it is not a zero-sum game. If Finland increases its security, it's not away from anybody else. We have both condemned the Russian warfare in Ukraine. We have both been helping Ukraine and Ukrainian people, and to continue that. With these words, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. President Sauli Niinistö, and thank you very much for hosting me today. It is wonderful to be here in Helsinki this evening at a pivotal moment in our shared history. It's pivotal because, as I also discussed with colleagues, with the Prime Minister Andersson in Sweden, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed the equation of European security, and it has rewritten our reality and reshaped our future. We've seen the end of the post-Cold War period, and the invasion of Ukraine, sadly, has opened a new chapter. And that invasion has already failed for two reasons. Firstly, because of the unbreakable spirit of the Ukrainian people who have fought back and rallied the world behind them. And second, because that Ukrainian struggle for freedom, that heroic fight, has brought the world together in condemnation of this assault on our values. And it would be fair to say that it has also brought Finland and the UK even closer together today. So the security declaration, the solemn declaration we've signed today, ensures that our two nations can intensify our partnership and take it to unparalleled heights, both latitudinal and metaphorical. From the high north to the Baltics and beyond, our armed forces will train, operate and exercise together, marrying our defence and security capabilities and formalising a pledge that we will always come to one another's aid. Because this is not a short-term stopgap, Sauli. This is not a short-term stopgap as you consider NATO membership, but an enduring assurance between two nations, an assurance that brings us ever closer as we face the challenges of today, the threats of tomorrow, side by side. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Prime Minister. Now we go to questions. Language of this press conference is English. First question goes to Patrick Holmström, Svenska Yle.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, will there be British boots on the ground on Finnish territory if Finland asks for it during a possible conflict with Russia? And how are you prepared for this? And Mr. President, is this security declaration enough for Finland in the current situation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me be clear, because I think the solemn declaration is itself clear. And what it says is that in the event of a disaster or in the event of an attack on either of us, then yes, we will come to each other's assistance, including with military assistance. But the nature of that assistance will, of course, depend upon the request of the other party. But it's also intended to be the foundation of an intensification of our security and our defence relationship in other ways as well.
Yes, like we heard, this cooperation, it increases enormously Finnish security. But security needs all the possible ways if we want to maximize our security. This is a very, very good way to go forward. And we do appreciate a lot this big step which is now taken.
Following question, ITV News, Raigi Omar.
Thank you very much, Reggie Omar, ITV News. My first question is to you, President Minister. You said that joining NATO is not against anyone and that this is not a zero-sum game. But through joining NATO, there is now going to be a military ring around Russia that runs from the Arctic, through the Baltics, through Central Europe, all the way to Turkey. Does that not pose quite a lot of danger, given the world view of Vladimir Putin, who doesn't see things not as a zero-sum game, because you have an 800-mile border with Vladimir Putin and the Russian government? And my question to you, Prime Minister, is that the British military has gone through decades of underinvestment. We're now at around 73,000, I believe, in terms of force of the army, something that was expressed by the outgoing top general of the British Army, who said he was uncomfortable with the size of the British military. Do you think that our military assurances, given that scenario, are coherent and valid and effective? Thank you.
First of all, we have to keep in mind that Finland is already an enhanced partner in NATO. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that Finland is part of the West, like we have learned to call it. So the change would not be that radical. When we think about security, we think how to defend our country. And if we want to maximize our security, that means to maximize defense of our country. And when I say that it's not away from anybody, well, nobody can hurt, because somebody wants to protect herself. So, in my thinking, this is quite simple, actually. We increase our security and we do not take it away from anybody. It is not a zero-sum game.
And I just want to echo completely what Sally has just said. NATO is a defensive alliance. NATO poses no threat to anyone. It is there for the purposes of mutual defence. And just on your point about the UK's capability to deploy, well, look at what's happening already. The UK is up in the High North Operation Cold Response. We're deployed in the Baltics, in Estonia. We're deployed in Poland. In Romania, in Cyprus, in the Eastern Mediterranean, across that whole eastern flank, you see the UK increasingly deployed, and that's because we've been able to make record investments in our armed services, the biggest since the end of the Cold War, and we will continue to support our armed services. I think 2.4% we're now spending of our GDP on defence, huge sums, and we make these commitments to our friends in Finland, not just because we can make them, and we certainly can, but also because we must.
Next question, again to the Finnish side, Finnish News Agency, and Mikko Gustafsson.
This one is for both Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. President. Prime Minister Johnson has called this declaration historic. What's the main difference before and after the declaration? And can you tell us any concrete examples?
Okay. Like we both said, we have been cooperating, especially with the CHEF combination, but we haven't had any clear bilateral agreements how we deal with each other, and now it is done. And we have to keep in mind that in this agreement we state also that we will enhance our cooperation in very different sectors.
And that's not only a written word, we will also do that. So I understand that it's getting forward, like I said, quite a big step from where we have already been.
Yes, and I completely agree with that, because Finland has, of course, traditionally been neutral, but this is formalising and making clear something that needs to be made explicit in the context of today, and that is that in the event of an attack on either of us, we will come to each other's support upon request. And as Sally has just said, it goes further than that, in the sense that it also means that we will cooperate further on intelligence sharing, on taking care to protect ourselves against cyber warfare, on defence procurement, on joint exercises, which we already do together, as Sally was just saying. So all those we will now develop, and this declaration will be the basis for further work.
And following questions, Nick Ferrari, LBC Radio.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. President, were you to join NATO, do you fear it could be seen as a provocative gesture by Vladimir Putin? And, Mr. President, if not, why not? Mr. Prime Minister, no country on the planet has sent more financial aid, military aid to the Ukraine than the United Kingdom. Reports of £2 billion and rising. Yet back home, we also hear that pensioners spend all day in the library because they can't afford to heat the home, and one man set fire to some driftwood to try and get warm. To those who say you're very good at supporting Ukraine, but you're lamentably poor at supporting your own people, how would you respond?
Yes. You have to keep in mind that this is not the first time we are discussing about NATO, and not the first time we will discuss about NATO with Russia. They have made it very clear earlier years that if you join NATO, they will do whatever they have explained, some contra steps. What they are, that is for us to guess. But now I got to get a bit deeper. The situation changed. So far, even Russia has said that having militarily non-aligned Finland and Sweden, that will stabilize Baltic Sea. That's what they have been talking. But then, in the end of last year, they stated that Finland and Sweden can't join NATO. They demanded that NATO doesn't take new members. Actually, they changed their own picture by that, because we have, with Sweden, been non-aligned militarily from our own will. But by stating that, Russia actually expressed that you don't have your own will here. And that is a huge change. That made us think. And what happened in 24th February, which continues the huge warfare Russia is having in Ukraine, surely that changed also the picture. They are ready to attack a neighboring country. So, when you ask how they see possible Finnish joining, well, if that would be the case that we join, well, my response would be that you caused this. Look at the mirror.
So, Nick, what we've got to do right now is help people through the aftershocks of the COVID pandemic, just as we help people through COVID, and we will. And we will have the maximum energy, effort, ingenuity to help the British people through them. And everybody knows how tough it can be right now, but we're going to get through it just as we got through COVID. And you know all the money we're already spending. There will be more. Of course, there will be more support in the months ahead as things continue to be tough with the increase in the energy prices. But I just want to explain to people why it is so important that we stand strong against aggression in Ukraine at the same time. Because there is no doubt at all, looking at what Vladimir Putin has done, that this, if he were not to be resisted, this would not be the end, as Sally has just said. This would not be the end of his neo-imperialist, revanchist ambitions. And just imagine the consequences, not just military or political, but economic, of further Russian aggression against any of the other former parts of the Soviet Union. And it's to prevent that further catastrophe that it's so important that we are together strong now, and Finland has been very strong too. And just to be clear, the only reason we're able to be strong in the way that we are is, of course, because we've had a strong economic recovery from COVID. We've just got to make sure that we help people through the aftershocks, and we certainly will. But it would be a huge mistake to think that it is the economic answer is to let Putin get away with his barbaric behavior in Ukraine. That would be a disaster for the global economy, apart from anything else.
President, Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen of the press, this concludes this press conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, we are emerging, aren't we, into a new kind of world diplomatically, where countries like Britain and Finland, Britain and Sweden have these bilateral agreements between two countries of mutual defence, where we agree to go to their aid if it comes to it. Tim Cross, Major General Tim Cross, and Ian Duncan-Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party, were both listening to the Prime Minister's words there. Let's get a brief response from them. Ian Duncan-Smith, what did you make of it?
Well, I thought it was very good. I think the whole idea of the UK leading the way on this is exactly where I felt they ought to be when we started off by leaving the European Union. It's what we should be doing. And it then paves the way for a fuller NATO membership. So these things are, although they're not officially precursors, they are stepping stones in a way into full membership. And Finland and Sweden will have to organize themselves differently to be able to work into the command and control structure of NATO, which is a big commitment and a big change for them. But yeah, no, excellent news, and I'm very glad. And by the way, I thought the comment the Prime Minister made is right, which this is not a choice of whether you support the Ukraine or those threatened or invaded versus a choice about whether you support your own people at home. We must support our own people at home, and we must deliver things like tax reductions, also interventions for those on the lowest incomes through universal credit, that sort of stuff. He can do. He has got the headroom to do it. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't also at the same time be standing up for those who fight for their freedom.
Tim Cross, we're almost out of time. 30 seconds. The Prime Minister was listing all the countries where British forces are now based. Can we afford it? Will we be stretched too much?
Well, the danger is we will be stretched too much. I mean, we're going back to your earlier question. The increase in defence spending has got to bring more mass back to the British military. And, you know, we're talking about a serious ability to commit forces to places like Finland. We need more people in the military, in the army in particular. Okay. And if we do spend 3%, how we spend that money needs to be very carefully thought through.
Tim Cross, Ian Duncan-Smith, there we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you today, and our thanks also to Sarah Elliott. Michelle Dewberry is next to reflect on that story and all the day's news. Do stand by.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Rain eases across southern parts of the UK during the rest of the day. Further showers in the north, however,